Pills or plants? When you think about the prescriptions that cardiologists give their patients, it's almost inevitably the pills that are atop that list. Diet and lifestyle seem to come later, if at all, from the recommendations of most doctors. I guess their RX pad is missing the checkbox for greens and beans. Tonight's guest, however, saw the benefits of lifestyle for himself and then realized his RX pad needed to be altered if he wanted to see those same improvements in his patients. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Spellos from Planned Parenthood Metro New York, and along with my co-hosts Judith Zerden and Ben Martins, and we'll bring everybody on screen right now. We welcome you to this episode of Heart to Healthy Heart, plant-based conversations that can save your life. As always, we encourage you, use the chat, let us know where you're watching from, and most importantly, ask your questions now. We'll get to as many as we can as time will allow. Now, to answer that pills or plants question, let me introduce tonight's special guest. Dr. Andrew Freeman is the Director of Clinical Cardiology, Director of Cardiovascular Prevention and Wellness, and an Associate Professor of Medicine at National Jewish Health in Denver, Colorado. He's also the founder and co-chair of the American College of Cardiology's Nutrition and Lifestyle Work Group. He combines both traditional Western medicine with a holistic approach on overall wellness and disease prevention through a combination of advanced cardiology diagnostics and lifestyle medicine in the form of a whole foods, plant-based diet, regular exercise, mindfulness, and support. He's been often nicknamed the vegan cardiologist, and his approach, which integrates the latest evidence-based medicine and lifestyle medicine, achieves excellent results for his patients. He's part of both the local and national American College of Cardiology and runs the regional Walk with the Doc program. Dr. Freeman, it is such an honor to have you on here tonight. Thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're going to start with the softball question because we always have to ask everyone, how'd you get started with a whole food plant-based diet? What brought you down that path to where you are right now?
Well, it's a long story. It's actually about 11 years ago, really. You know, I was in fellowship training in North Philadelphia, and like everybody else, we would tell our patients, don't eat a cheesesteak after they had a heart attack, and then we would all run and have cheesesteaks. And we really thought nothing of it, to tell you the truth. It was sort of the norm. And where I grew up in New York, on Long Island, it wasn't dinner unless you had, a big piece of meat in your plate and or a big piece of fish and a few carrots on the side. And I never really sort of put it all together until I moved out to Colorado. I started a program called Walk with a Doc, where I was walking with my patients and modeling how exercise can improve outcomes. And then I really got into nutrition because, like everybody else, I got good at throwing meds at people, but not everyone got better. A lot of people didn't even really change very much. But when I started doing lifestyle medicine for myself and went all the way plant-based, not only did I drop all that weight from the cheesesteaks in Philadelphia, but I was able to redo my life insurance physical and got a rebate check in the mail, which was pretty amazing. And then when I started doing it with my patients, the results for the first time ever were unbelievably rewarding, right? So all of a sudden, patients would come in and their blood pressure would be normal, their diabetes would be in remission, their autoimmune disease would be under control. And these were just mind-blowing and unheard of. And, it still is an uphill battle, but a big uphill battle, because back 12 years ago, I was a sole fish swimming upstream and everyone thought I was crazy. And now every professional society on the planet endorses this approach, and the results are extraordinarily good. We just have a big gap, as you mentioned in your intro, that not everyone's practicing this way. So bottom line is, I think I saw the results personally. The results I've seen in my patients are what really energize and recharge me. And my hope is that the rest of the world will catch on. If we keep going this way, we're not going to have this beautiful scene behind me, which for those of you that are just listening is a picture of the beach with a beautiful sunset. And further, we're not going to have healthy food or long lives to enjoy all this stuff. So I hope people change and change soon.
Yeah, I think we all feel that same way. Judy.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Dr. Freeman. So you have quoted the Surgeon General as saying that we should make controlling blood pressure a national priority. Why is this so important?
Blood pressure is a surprisingly under-tackled, if you will, disease. right? So first, roughly 50% of Americans have some form of heart disease, most of which is high blood pressure. So, you turn to your left, you turn to your right, somebody's got some form of heart disease, and many times they don't even know it. If you look, hypertension or high blood pressure is the silent killer, right? And it's called that because you don't know you have it until it does something bad to you. It's not like it automatically presents with symptoms until it gets very severe. So, what I also tell people is if you look at some of the studies that have been done, it's a major risk factor, right? So for roughly every 20 points on average, you go above 120 systolic, the risk for dying doubles. So it's exponential. So you may not think much of, say, a blood pressure of 140, right? Oh, that's normal for me, people say. And they're at double the risk for dying. And at 160, quadruple, and at 180, 8 times. And it just goes up exponentially. And I don't think people recognize it at all. And I know doctors find this incredibly unsexy to deal with, so they don't, right? The primary care doctor says, oh, that's the cardiologist. The cardiologist says, well, I don't do blood pressure. That's the primary care doctor. And these days, with the widespread burnout in medicine, nobody's doing what they should do anyway. So we have this ongoing problem. And you may have seen this, which is really earth-shattering. And for the listeners that don't know this, heart disease is actually on the rise again. Even though we had all those good medicines and approaches, we're headed towards trouble, right? So we probably need to do something even more different, even in the era of all these great medicines and therapeutics.
So is 120 considered to be a good systolic blood pressure? Is it 120 over 80? What's the number?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, it's sort of a graded spectrum. So, I would say that in general, 120 over 80 is perfectly fine. 110 is perfectly fine, right? If you go to parts of the world where Western society doesn't prevail, walking around with a blood pressure of 100 is not necessarily abnormal. But I think that a lot of us have gotten used to, well, this is normal for me. And so my blood pressure is 140 or 150, and that's the way it is. It's sort of like this. If you ask a room full of smokers how much smoking is normal, everybody says more than one cigarette, right? But that doesn't mean it's normal.
Yeah. And moderation always tends to be whatever I'm doing plus a little bit more, right?
Well, right. People need to realize that this is a population statistic, right? So is it possible that you could live to be 119 with a blood pressure of 160 at all times? Yeah, you could. It's unlikely. I mean, the same reason we're talking today, right? Eating a plant-based diet, we all know people who have smoked cartons of cigarettes and can drink out of a fryer, and they live to be 119, but you don't know you're that person till you get there. And chances are it's not you. It's like winning the lottery if you're that person. So this is really a hedge against your future health. And this is really important. And this is something I share with my patients all the time. The American curse is you work hard your whole life, you save your money, and what do you look forward to in retirement? Heart attacks, strokes, dementia, erectile dysfunction in men. It's a terrible way to retire. And we can avoid most, if not all of this, if we just pivot the way we live every day.
Makes perfect sense.
One more follow-up on blood pressure, if you please. So tell us briefly, I know we could spend the whole time on this, but how does whole food, plant-based nutrition and exercise help to control blood pressure?
That's a loaded question. It's a complicated answer, but the long and short of it is exercise forever has been known. If you watch people's blood pressure when they exercise, it typically goes up as they exercise, and then it comes down below where it started. That's really the effect we're after. So if you exercise more, your blood pressure actually tends to be lower longer. But the other part of it is we know that a plant-based diet, and we've known this for a very long time, lowers blood pressure. So if you look at what's called a DASH diet, there was a DASH trial, and DASH is an acronym for Dietary Approaches for Stopping Hypertension. And it is a predominantly plant-based diet that actually lowers blood pressure really well. If you go back in time to the portfolio diet or any of the other Mediterranean diet studies, people who eat this way tend to have lower blood pressure. One, we're probably not eating as much salt. So like, for instance, people don't realize, but we take in an inordinate number of salt. I mean, I'm sure you all have been out to dinner with people where the moment the food comes out, the salt shaker's going, you haven't even tasted the food. And then on top of that, many of the foods we eat, most people don't even realize just how salt they are. For example, poultry is actually one of the number one sources of salt in the American diet. And that's because the chicken or turkey or whatever you buy has been brined or injected with a salty solution before it leaves the store. And that prevents it from weeping all that nasty stuff into the package. But further, it also makes the grocer more money because the salt water that's in it weighs more. That said, people don't even realize it. You eat a bowl of a Raisin Bran type of a cereal and you get, 600 milligrams of salt. And we're only supposed to have about 1,500 milligrams. And then, my favorite when I was in New York, before I went plant-based, when I was eating all those cancer-causing cold cuts and pastrami, was to have a nice salty pickle, right? A kosher pickle. Who doesn't love those? Now, those are plant-based for the listeners, maybe an occasional indulgence. But remember that one of those has as much salt as you need for a whole day. And we know that when we eat a lot of salt, the blood pressure goes up. So the last part is when you eat a mostly plant-based diet, it's loaded with antioxidants. It's loaded with naturally occurring nitrates, and these lower blood pressure. So if you think about it, you may have seen that a lot of people, when they're doing marathons or Tour de France or whatever, if they are legally doping, they're doping with plants, and particularly greens, beet greens, and beets. It turns out there was a study a couple of years ago that showed that if you drink 250 cc's of beet juice a day, it lowers blood pressure as well as many pills that we use. Now, remember, if you drink beet juice, your urine will turn red, your stool will turn red. You're probably not bleeding to death, but it will be something to be worried about. But what I will tell you is it's a surprising way to boost antioxidants, and then that causes blood pressure and blood vessels to relax. So I would say there's a million mechanisms in place, and it turns out that eating the way we were probably intended, which is a predominantly plant-based diet, if not fully, seems to do all sorts of great and beneficial things to prevent disease development.
Thank you.
Doc, could you tell us about your involvement with Walk a Doc? How often do you lead these walks?
Yeah, so Walk with a Doc actually started with a cardiologist, a good friend of mine in Columbus, Ohio, David Sabger. And he decided that, like everything, we always have our patients come in and we say to them, hey, you should go walk or exercise or do something active. And the patients, oh, sure, doc, no problem. And of course, the next time they come in, they're usually heavier and they're not active at all. So he decided to do something about it, right? And similar to all of us that are working, many times your employer helps you or you decide to put some of your money away so you can't spend it the moment the paycheck hits your account. So you have an automatic mechanism, if you will, for savings. So I think in general, figuring out a way to make it so that you could exercise automatically was what he was after. And so he started walking with his patients on a Saturday morning, no copays, informal, teaching them about things, giving them a healthy breakfast, and spread it across the country. I was one of the first chapters up and running. We'll be celebrating our 13th anniversary in May, having touched thousands of Denver citizens. And it is probably one of the more recharging things I do. People get to see that I'm a normal human being. I wear sneakers. I eat bananas, right? I mean, I go for a walk with them and we talk about things just like we're talking today. And it's a really powerful way to not only make exercise automatic, but really demonstrate and model the healthy behaviors we're all looking for.
Makes perfect sense. We do have a question. I want to interject right here. Someone had asked a question, and let me just grab it right now, about protein, which I know is a question that always comes up. But the question straightforward is, older adult, late 60s, do I need to be concerned about getting enough protein while following a healthy plant-based diet?
Yeah, so let me help put everybody at ease. In the United States, I have yet to see protein deficiency in the normal population. There are certainly health scenarios where you could be massively protein deficient. But for the run-of-the-mill person with no active disease, protein deficiency doesn't really exist in the United States. You have to be calorie deficient to be protein deficient in most cases. Yes, you could have all sorts of kidney and liver and gut issues. And if you eat, say, just iceberg lettuce, you might not get enough protein. But even iceberg lettuce actually has some protein. Remember, the building blocks of life are protein. So no matter what you eat, you're getting some amount of protein. Now, if you said to me, is iceberg lettuce a concentrated source of protein? Probably not. That said, if you look at some of the other leafy greens, kale, spinach, broccoli, those are actually pretty decently good in protein. Pound for pound, and remember that a pound of chicken is a little, handful, and a pound of dry weight kale is a big, tableful. But if you eat that, you'll have probably more protein than that chicken or steak piece. So remember that Earth's biggest plant eaters, elephants, gorillas, right? When was the last time you saw, you can't see this one at the zoo, or you can't see this one in nature because they're protein deficient. It just doesn't happen. So in short, I wouldn't really worry about protein deficiency unless you're one of those very special cases, which is quite rare. And in general, most of us get a lot of protein. You probably need, if you're an average sized person, somewhere between 30 and 60 grams a day, maybe a little more if you're lifting weight, maybe a little more if you're very active, maybe a little more if you're, trying to build muscle or something like that. But by and large, it's very easy to do. And just to give your listeners some idea of how that looks, think about this. If you drink coffee in the morning and you put a cup of soy milk in with your 2 cups of coffee, unsweetened soy milk, it has, 10 to 13 grams of protein, boom, right there. And then you have a bowl of oatmeal, and maybe you put a little ground flaxseed or a few almonds in there and some berries on top, and you have another 8, 10, 12, 14 grams of protein. And then maybe for lunch, you have a nice big salad with all those greens I was talking about. And maybe you have a little tofu in the salad, a few potatoes, maybe some brown rice, maybe some beans. And all of a sudden you have 20 or 30 grams of protein. And we haven't even hit dinner yet, and you've already hit what you need for the day. So I guess what I would say is, in general, unless you have a very special condition, I wouldn't worry too much.
Judy, I know you have a question about diabetes, but one follow-up on the protein is, as you get older, do you need more?
I think that's a little bit of a controversial topic, and I would say it depends on what you're doing. In general, I think a lot of people overdose on protein. And then as they get older, people many times are overdosing on not only multivitamins and supplements, but also proteins. Again, I think I would say that in general, unless you have a very special case, you may not need that much more protein than when you're younger. And I would argue you might need more when you're younger, since you're growing and building and so forth. So I'm not sure there's a clear answer that I would stand behind on that one. So,
yeah. So to my question about the connection between heart disease and diabetes, since we're talking about excess protein, I probably should have changed that to the connection between heart disease and kidney disease. But I'll stick with my original plan, and I'll ask you about diabetes. I mean, they're all so connected, but I think a lot of our listeners, we really haven't delved into that on our live stream yet. So to just give a very brief introduction into how they're connected.
So diabetes is a disease where your body doesn't process sugars well. And the high sugar content seems to be toxic to a lot of organs, right? You probably know people who have eye disease and vascular disease, et cetera. So diabetes is really a coronary artery disease risk equivalent, meaning it is a really potent risk factor for the development of heart disease through a variety of mechanisms.
Doc, we understand that you have been involved in the research on keto diet. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, let me finish on the diabetes, because there's one other point. You told me to be brief, and then I'll jump into the keto diet. So I want the listeners to realize that what many people have been told is a sort of a subset of the truth, right? So everyone makes carbs the demons, the enemies, and carbs are not really the enemies. Carbs are probably quite good for you. If you look at beans, brown rice, whole grain, unprocessed carbs, they're great for you. It's the garbage carbs or garbage that we got to get rid of. The chips, the cookies, the muffins, all those things. And the reason why this matters in diabetes is not necessarily a disease of carbohydrate excess. It's more of a disease of fat excess. And what happens is you get fatty deposits on the liver, you get fatty deposits in the muscles. And then when you eat carbs of any kind, your blood sugar spikes because the receptors don't come out and work so well. So in the 1940s, a very famous doctor named Kempner at Duke treated his diabetics with white rice and fruit and cured the vast majority of them with a combination of white rice and fruit, basically a sugar-based diet that was very low in fat, and walking regularly. Now, as for the keto diet, so the truth of the matter is, if you look at the literature throughout the last 20, 30 years, ketogenic diets are largely associated with bad health outcomes, with a few exceptions. There are some neurologic and seizure disorders that do respond to this type of approach, and those are specialized cases. And it is true that many people, when they eat a keto diet, do lose weight, and that may be responsible for some of the health effects that you see in the literature or that you see reported on mass media TV. And if you are a fan of nutrition facts and you watch Michael Greger, he'll tell you, well, that just means skinnier coffins. So yes, it means people lose weight, but they're putting themselves at great risk. And if you look at how people are doing the keto diet, right, they're eating bacon-wrapped scallops, right? Now, bacon, considered to be as cancer-causing as cigarettes by the World Health Organization, loaded with salt, right? One little slice has as much as you need for a whole day. And a scallop is a little cholesterol bomb. And then if you think about the amount of colon cancer we're seeing in the United States, you have all these other things competing. And then I've certainly taken care of a number of patients who, when they go on a keto diet, their bad cholesterol, the LDL, shoots up. I've seen younger people who have had cardiac issues as a result of this. And it's hard to say it's exactly because of the keto diet. And yes, there are people out there who can consume a keto diet and seem to do quite well, but those don't seem to be in the majority, at least in my opinion. And in general, the outcomes, the long-term outcomes, and some of the ones that are published in the literature from years ago are actually quite poor. Well, you might say, well, doctor, you read the evidence. What about all the recent stuff? Well, there's a couple of companies out there that are behind some of the studies that actually make money off of this approach. And so their studies are positive-ish into the keto space, and it's a little controversial. Me and several others have tried to request the actual raw data and have been unable to obtain it.
Wow.
Wow.
So got a couple questions coming in from our audience here. We've touched a little bit on some of them. This one is about B12. Are there ways to obtain it from plants, or do we have to take a supplement if we're following this type of diet?
Yeah. So great question. If you follow a strict plant-based diet, you might become B12 deficient, and usually after some time, right? So if you're eating cheeseburgers today and you say, you know what, this Freeman guy seems believable, I'm going to do it, you're not going to be B12 deficient tomorrow. Maybe in a year you might be. But what I would tell you is the thought is that our food supply is so clean that the naturally occurring yeasts that would normally be on our fruits and vegetables are just not there. And that's where a lot of the B12 is. And so in general, nutritional yeast, for those of you that haven't tried it, I know it sounds odd or weird or yucky, is actually surprisingly tasty. It's a dry yellow powder. You put it on things like popcorn, and it all of a sudden converts it into a cheesy, nutty flavored popcorn that's loaded with B12. If you want to eat brewer's yeast, some people like that. That also has a good amount of B12 in it. And then if you don't want to eat that stuff, take a multivitamin. And remember that when you go to the store and you get B12 in the jar, it'll say, one pill is like 10,000% of your US recommended daily allowances. It's not very well absorbed. So have no fear, you're not going to get too toxic on B12.
Judy?
Yeah. Okay. So just to totally switch gears here, other research that you've been involved in or looked at involves intermittent fasting. And I know there's a lot of interest in that lately, whether you're doing intermittent fasting with a whole food plant-based diet or not. Is that something that is thought to be good for you?
Well, so I guess what I would say is the intermittent fasting data is emerging. There's not a strong consensus that says this is the way. But what I would tell you is there's certainly no harm in restricting when you're eating if you're trying to lose weight more quickly. So for instance, if you said to me, well, I'm going to do keto, but I'm going to do it fully plant-based, and I'm going to intermittently fast, might I lose weight quicker? And you probably would, right? Just by cutting out all the stuff you wouldn't normally eat and the time that you would eat it. So the way intermittent fasting works is most people do like an 18-6, right? So 6 hours any given day is when they eat. 18 hours they don't eat. They drink water, drink unsweetened tea or unsweetened coffee. And during those 6 hours they eat, and ideally they eat a plant-based diet. And for some people, there appears to be significant weight loss that's achievable. But I would say it's not for everybody, right? So if you're one of those people like me where some days you're getting up at 4 a.m. and you have to wait 8 hours or so to eat, you might not be able to make it, especially if you're running around, especially if you've worked out. But for some people, it works great. And if you have that kind of willpower, I think it's really powerful. So I guess what I would say is stay tuned, but the data appears to be strong. And it's interesting, actually, and this is where some of the keto stuff might play a role. It turns out that having ketones in your blood might actually be good for you, but how you get those ketones might matter. And we all make ketones when we fast. If you don't eat for 6 or 8 hours, you make ketones. If you drink black coffee, you make ketones, and those might be helpful. The question is, if you get ketones by getting rid of all of the beneficial carbohydrates in the world, is that beneficial? That appears to not be beneficial. So I think we're still on the verge of really understanding all of this, if it makes sense.
Yeah, I just have one quick follow-up on that about if you're looking to do intermittent fasting for blood glucose control, is there any data on that rather than weight loss?
Yes, there is, right? People have different and variable responses to when they don't eat, what happens with their glucose, right? Most people's glucose goes down, but the moment they eat, it goes back up again, depending on what they eat. There's some really lovely research going on out of Israel, actually, where researchers are trying to figure out why some people, when they eat ice cream, their blood sugar goes up, and why some people, they eat ice cream and their blood sugar goes down. So I think that there's probably not one perfect recipe for weight loss or blood sugar control or the amount of ketones or how they come into your body, et cetera. I think there's going to be some degree of personalization. But what seems to be very clear is the people that eat a plant-based diet are not only doing wonders for the world and the environment they live in, which of course is very important to our health, right? If we don't have a safe planet to live in, everything else is for naught. But further, they seem to do better. So the question is, do some people do better by eating certain foods at certain times? I think the answer is probably yes. We just don't know enough about who to recommend which.
Thank you.
Only have time for a few more questions. Ben, I know you have a great one that we have a few from the audience. So Ben, go for it.
Doc, we hear a lot of about olive oil being beneficial for your health, particularly in connection with studies of the Mediterranean diet. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, oil is controversial. So I know you guys have spoken with Dr. Esselstyn, my colleague, and he'll tell you no oil. The truth is, if you press him hard enough, he'll let you eat 3 walnut halves in a day. And his work comes from bench research, which shows that oil seems to impair endothelial function. And we know from even human research that if you eat a very high-fat meal, one of my colleagues here in town, a guy named Dr. Robert Vogel, did that study where if you eat cheeseburgers, your endothelial cells shut down for a while. So the question is, if you take fat and you extract it out of an olive, you just squeeze the olive and oil comes out. If you look at other oils, it needs high pressure and heat to get oil out of a little teeny tiny seed. So then the question becomes, well, what does the body do after you extract that and do all the work that your body might do to break down things? And sometimes it does bad things like make triglycerides, or you can potentially have this endothelial problem. So I guess what I would say is if you're very high risk, you might want to avoid oil. And if you're not very high risk, you might do okay with a little bit of olive oil or canola, sunflower, safflower, which are the ones that have shown some positive outcomes. But I would be cautious, right? I don't want you to, drink liters of olive oil every day. I don't want you to fry everything up in olive oil, but use it sparingly. It's like a condiment as opposed to I'm going to dip every vegetable in it.
Yeah.
But you said you might be okay with a little bit. That means the benefits.
Yeah, if you look at the studies that have been done, particularly with olive oil, the health outcomes appear to be somewhat good.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would say is there's also data suggesting that oil might be bad. And the question is, have we really broken it down into which oil is doing which? Mm-hmm. And I think if I had to pick, olive oil makes the most sense to me, right? You just squeeze it and the oil comes out. Everything else, have you ever seen a canola seed? It's like this little teeny, So the real question is, which person is going to react poorly to oil? I don't think we know the answer to that. And I would say the evidence, and especially the Mediterranean diet studies, have shown that a little bit of olive oil seems to be healthful. Now, you could argue that the Mediterranean diet study showed more of its benefit with stroke as opposed to heart attack. And then when it combined with heart attack, it was the stroke that carried it to beneficial. If you look at the pro-vegetarian sub-cohort of the Mediterranean diet study, the people that were vegetarian, they did even better, but they still had some olive oil. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I would say is limit your oils. And then if you're at high risk, you might want to avoid them.
And also for weight loss, obviously, olive oil is so calorically dense.
All oils, margarines, they are super high in calories. A little teeny cup of olive oil is just rich.
Okay, let's do 2 rapid questions with a very quick response. One is someone who wants to know about lowering blood pressure without medication. Any particular foods that are good for that?
Really just eat a plant-based diet and exercise. I would say those are the most powerful ways to go. And then nitrate-rich foods, so the dark green leafy vegetables are good stuff.
And then since you mentioned exercise, how much exercise should somebody aim for weekly? Is there an amount that is optimal in terms of benefit?
Yeah. So first check with your doctor, make sure you're safe for exercise, and then aim for about 30 minutes a day of breathlessness. So people say, do I have a target heart rate and all that? When you become elite, we can talk about target heart rate. But for now, go with your significant other, friend, partner, whoever it may be, and let them talk to you. And you should have trouble talking back. So it's good for your relationship and your body. But you want to challenge yourself for 30 minutes a day.
Okay, the last question we have is a long one, but if we can just cut it down into essential tremors, any idea what might would food keep those from escalating for someone in their 70s?
Believe it or not, there are some studies out there that have shown that a plant-based diet might reduce tremors. I don't think there's an extensive research base in this space. And I would say that if your tremors are significant in affecting your voice, it may be more than just essential tremor. And I'd recommend you check in with a neurologist. There's also been some really great work out of Oregon. You may know Roy Swank. His institute is still there. He did some of the first pioneering multiple sclerosis work and showed how a plant-based diet significantly can attenuate that disease. So I would encourage that listener to check with their neurologist or get to see one.
Great answers, and unfortunately, we are out of time. Dr. Freeman, on behalf of Ben, Judy, myself, the entire plant-powered community, thanks so much for your time and all the questions you answered and all you do for your patients in the community in Denver. It's been a privilege having you here.
My pleasure.
And for those of you who want to really jumpstart what you're doing, we have our Plant-Powered Metro Next 21-day jumpstart starting right around the corner next Thursday, March 2nd. Please visit our website. Now, if I can remember to put things on the screen properly and quickly enough, we can even get the website up there, but it is plantpoweredmetrony.org. Next month on Heart to Healthy Heart, we will welcome cardiologist Dr. Michelle O'Donoghue to our broadcast on Thursday, the 30th of March at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And as always, if you want to watch any of our episodes again, they're all on the Planned Powered Metro New York YouTube channel. So on behalf of Judith and Ben, I am Jim Spellos wishing you optimal health and look forward to seeing you next month on Heart to Healthy Heart.